Good morning. Ahead on Face the State, preparing to sue. The ACLU of Ohio says it will challenge the state's new transgender medical care and women's sports law in court. What the suit will focus on and the response to it. Republican State Senator Teresa Gavarone weighs in on this and on new bills at the State House. Plus, legal sports betting just passed its first anniversary in Ohio. Are more people now seeking treatment for a gambling problem? We'll look at the trends and how to avoid the pitfalls ahead of the Super Bowl. Now on Face the State. Thanks for joining us this Sunday morning for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. On January 24th, the Ohio State Senate voted 24-8 to override Governor Mike DeWine's veto of the controversial transgender medical care and women's sports bill, House Bill 68. The House did the same 2 weeks earlier. The law will go into effect in late April, 90 days from the Senate vote. However, last week, the ACLU of Ohio announced it is preparing to file a lawsuit aiming to halt the law before it takes effect on April 23rd. The law would ban some forms of gender-affirming care for minors in Ohio, including gender transition surgeries, hormone therapy, and puberty blockers. The law is known as the SAFE Act, which stands for Saving Adolescents from Experimentation. It also bans transgender student athletes from playing girls and women's sports. The ACLU says it is specifically challenging the ban on gender-affirming medical care for transgender minors. In a news release, the ACLU of Ohio legal director Frida Levinson said HB 68 violates the Ohio Constitution. Quote, "We are preparing litigation to defend transgender youth and their constitutional right to receive medically necessary health care. The use of gender-affirming hormone therapy to treat transgender minors is supported by every major medical association in our country. Transgender youth, together with their doctors and parents, should have access to evidence-based medical care just like anyone else. Families should be able to make these private, personal decisions based on the advice of their physicians and free from interference by politicians." House Bill 68's primary sponsor, Republican State Representative Gary Click, responded to the ACL's lawsuit with a statement saying, "The announcement of the ACLU lawsuit comes without surprise. They have a storied history of inventing fictitious rights while opposing actual rights, such as those enshrined in the SAFE Act. Children have a right to grow up intact." He goes on to say, gender-affirming care is a slogan, not science. Sex changes for children and counseling without parental consent are not the types of civil rights embedded in our Constitution. I have complete faith in Ohio Attorney General David Yost's ability to defend the SAFE Act. Joining me now to discuss this and other topics before the legislature is Republican Senator Teresa Gavarone of Bowling Green. She serves as the Senate Majority Whip. Senator, thank you for being here today. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's get to that. These legal challenges were expected. Leaders have been talking about that. They knew this was going to happen. But what is your take on the ACLU's lawsuit?
Well, again, I'm really not surprised that they would do this, but House Bill 68 is really about protecting children. We do a lot of things. We pass a lot of legislation to protect children in Ohio, and there are a lot of things kids can't do. I mean, they're limited in the hours they can work and the kind of jobs they can hold. They're not able to buy alcohol or smoke cigarettes or, now even marijuana. Why? Because their brains aren't fully formed. They don't have the maturity. And this bill is about protecting children. I mean, who you are at age 13, 14, 15 is not who you are later in life. So let's give children a chance to be children. And when they're adults, they can make those decisions.
What about the argument, though, that this takes away that power from the parents and their medical providers?
This gives children a chance to grow up intact and be children. Certainly, if there's therapy and parents consent, children can have consultations and therapy and continue to work on behavioral health challenges they may be facing. Gender dysphoria is a medical condition. And children will be able to, with the consent of a parent, we need to make sure parents are involved in these decisions as well. So if a parent consents, the child can have that mental health counseling. But before any life-altering gender hormones or medical procedures are performed on children, they've got to be an adult to make those decisions.
A political science professor I had on the show told me the state constitutional amendment legalizing abortion could come into play in the lawsuit in the sense of the right to make medical decisions. Has that been a topic of discussion within the caucus and a concern about how that might play into the challenge of the new law?
I believe this new law is constitutional, and I believe it'll pass constitutional muster in this lawsuit and will go forward.
Okay, I want to talk about several different topics with you today. First of all, very high-profile story about Alabama recently executing a death row inmate using the method of nitrogen gas hypoxia. On Tuesday, then, two state representatives introduced a bill here to add the method of execution, this alternative here in Ohio. Where do you stand on that?
Well, the death penalty has been a topic of discussion quite a bit at the State House. And this is a new tool. There hasn't been an execution in Ohio in several years, and this would be a new tool in Ohio. But when you're looking at execution, we have to remember this is an important tool for prosecutors, especially when we're looking at the most violent criminals who are even subject to the death penalty. And we have to remember the victims. There's always so much focus on the criminal, the defendant in these cases. We have to remember there are victims and their families who deserve justice, and this can be a tool to help bring about a more speedy resolution for those families and justice for them.
So taking the argument, pro or anti-death penalty off the table for now, there were reports that in the Alabama execution, he writhed on the table for a few minutes, was gasping, and it took 22 minutes from the time the curtain opened until it closed. Do you think maybe Ohio should wait a little bit longer for more information on this method, and perhaps see how it goes in other states, or do you think it's good to push forward now, adding this method as an alternative, if the lethal injection medications aren't available, which it looks like they won't be?
Well, certainly as this legislation goes through the committee process, there'll be an opportunity for broad discussion, a lot of public input, and I anticipate a lengthy discussion and a lot of study on this issue.
Okay, so it's not going to happen just overnight automatically.
Yeah.
Also, let's see. Lawmakers also introduced a couple bills recently to eliminate the state income tax over the next 6 years or so. How do you feel about that law? Do you think that's a good way to go?
Well, I certainly believe that your hard-earned money is your money and not the government's. I believe in lowering taxes. As a matter of fact, in our recent budget, we made historic tax cuts for all Ohioans. I think $3.1 billion staying in your pockets, which is important. And we collapsed the tax brackets from a few years ago, it was 9 tax brackets, and now we're down to 2, which is important. So I'm looking forward to going through the details of this legislation and seeing, how that income revenue is being, replaced to make sure we're funding services. Yeah. But I think it's a conversation worth having.
You started to answer my next question, actually. The Ohio Department of Taxation did say it collected $13 billion in personal income taxes in 2022, and those are a major source of funding for schools and Medicaid. So, how do you replace a revenue source like that?
I'm certain we'll be having a lot of discussions, and I'm looking forward to hearing about the plan for replacing those funds and how we can go forward.
Okay. Do you think that this could end up leading, though, to a higher sales tax? That that the argument would be that would impact lower income people more?
I'm looking forward to the details. I haven't had a chance to study exactly how this revenue would be replaced, but I'm looking forward to learning more.
Okay. Now, just a few weeks ago, you introduced Senate Bill 215, which would prohibit foreign national contributions for ballot issues. Why is this necessary? What prompted it?
Well, it's really important. As a matter of fact, it's an extension of current law. So current law for the past few decades, you have not been allowed to accept contributions from foreign nationals for candidate races. Mm-hmm. So this extends that to ballot initiatives. We've been hearing more about these large contributions going into different organizations such as 501c4s from foreign nationals to influence our ballot initiatives. You know,
So did this come out of the votes for issues 1 and 2 on abortion and marijuana?
no, it didn't. It's really a very bipartisan issue. It's something that the vast majority of Democrats and Republicans agree that we should not be having foreign nationals influencing our elections. You know, our Constitution should be decided by Ohioans, not influenced by people from other countries coming in, trying to change the landscape of our state.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of bipartisanship, you also, along with, I guess, Senator DeMora, introduced, was it House Bill, or Senate Bill, 137, about ranked choice voting, and it would ban ranked choice voting, which, as you know, it's basically voters can rank their candidates in order of preference rather than just choosing one. This bill would ban that. Why is that necessary at this time in our political life?
We've been working really hard to make sure we're increasing transparency and creating greater voter confidence, getting timely results to our elections. And people look to Ohio as a leader, and there's always room for improvement, but people can count on election results pretty much the night of the election. You know what's happening. What this bill does is it completely undoes any kind of transparency. It confuses voters. The tabulation process is really confusing. As a matter of fact, there was an error. There was a case in California where they used ranked choice voting and they certified the election results. And then afterwards, someone was doing some research and found they made a mistake in the tabulation. And after the results were certified, it took months to fix and put the correctly elected person into place in that position. So what does that do for voter confidence? And if voters can't see how that tabulation process is, it really has been found to reduce voter turnout. It takes longer. It can take several weeks to come up with a result. And for each tabulation, increase costs to our boards of elections. So it undoes a lot of the good work we've been trying to accomplish here in Ohio. So we want to ban it.
And where does that stand right now? That's a fairly new bill as well, right?
Yeah, it's in committee right now, and we're having conversations. Looking forward to having some more hearings in committee.
We just have a little bit of time left, but I wanted to know, can we do a quick civics lesson here? You know, I introduced you as the Senate Majority Whip. What does the Senate Majority Whip do? What are your responsibilities?
Well, it sounds like a very intimidating position, but really I see where our caucus stands when it comes to certain bills that are coming to the floor. Do people support it? Do they not support it? Does anyone has a problem with it? And contrary to what some may believe, I don't coerce people into voting for anything. If someone has an issue with a bill, I try to get answers for them, clear up any misunderstandings, and if they, at the end of the day, vote their conscience, then that's what they should do. But I certainly try to help facilitate answering any questions and seeing where people stand on bills so we know whether we should move forward with a piece of legislation to the floor.
Senator Teresa Gavarone, thank you so much for your time today. I do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Hope to have you again.
I'd be happy to come back.
Thank you. Well, still ahead on Face the State, more on the push for a new execution method in Ohio, why some lawmakers and the Attorney General support it. Welcome back to Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. It's a new debate over the death penalty after Alabama became the first state to carry out an execution by using nitrogen gas hypoxia late last month. A few days later, Ohio Republican lawmakers introduced a bill to allow the execution method here. The state of Ohio has not carried out the death penalty since 2018. 10 TV's Tara Jabbour looks at why lawmakers are pushing for this.
Some Republican lawmakers want to find a new way to carry out the death penalty in Ohio.
Nitrogen hypoxia is an alternative method for carrying out capital punishments that has been made available in other states.
If passed, the law would allow inmates to choose between lethal injection or nitrogen hypoxia. But if lethal injection is not available, then nitrogen would be used.
This is a method that the Attorney General spoke to that is humane and most people would find to be reasonable. And so, we're trying to arrive at a method that can gain the broadest support.
Attorney General Dave Yost supports this bill. He says the average wait time for someone on death row is about 21 years.
This is not something that should be taken lightly. But at the same time, there are crimes that are so heinous, that are so against basic humanity, that they deserve the ultimate punishment.
AG Yost says lawmakers need to decide the future of the death penalty in Ohio. He pointed to families of victims that have been promised the death penalty in their cases but haven't gotten justice.
We at least owe it to ourselves and to everyone else, including those jurors who had to look deep in their souls to render this verdict and other verdicts like it, to own it and to say we've changed our minds, and to express the reasons.
We asked Governor DeWine about his stance on the death penalty, and he says he won't comment on the bill because there hasn't been any movement yet.
Even if you believe in the death penalty, if you had 10 things to do to reduce crime, 10 things to save lives, the death penalty would probably not be on that top 10 list. If you look at the average time it has taken between the actual offense and when the death penalty has been imposed, when it has been imposed and actually carried out, it's a long, long period of time.
Tara Jabor, 10 TV News.
And 10 TV will continue to follow the death penalty bill and keep you posted on what happens. More to come on Face the State. It can be fun and exciting to bet on the big game, but if you're betting too much, even when the games aren't so big, it might be a problem. Up next, the trends for addiction treatment a year after sports betting became legal in Ohio. You can watch Super Bowl 58 right here on 10 TV next Sunday, February 11th. Do you watch for the game, the commercials, the halftime show, all of the above? And do you like to have a little skin in the game? The Super Bowl is a big sports betting event with bets on just about anything you can think of surrounding the game. And this year it comes just after the one-year anniversary of legalized sports gambling in Ohio. A state report released Wednesday shows more than $7.6 billion was wagered on sports in Ohio in 2023. But gambling leads some people down a path to problems, financial and otherwise. Today, we're looking at the trends in addiction treatment in Ohio since sports gambling became legal, why gambling in general hooks some people, and how to avoid the pitfalls. Mary Haven, Inc. is a nonprofit organization that helps people and families dealing with addiction and mental health challenges through education, treatment, and support. Mary Haven specializes in addiction recovery and says its clinicians and counselors have served more than 300,000 men, women, and adolescents since 1953. The organization started helping clients struggling with gambling in 2009. Joining me now are Mary Haven President and CEO Oyama Garrison to my left and Mary Haven Gambling Program Administrative Coordinator Abdullah Mahmood. First of all, both of you, thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you, Doug, for having us.
Yeah, appreciate your time. Oyama, first of all, for you, just let's talk. Since legalized sports betting went into effect last January, what have you seen in terms of numbers of calls or clients and for treatment in your facility?
Yeah, well, Doug, first and foremost, this is a very relevant topic for us to discuss. We often talk about beating the stigmas around traditional addictions that we tend to know, whether it's substance use, mental health, those kinds of complexities. And we often overlook this particular issue when we think about gambling. There's a thin line, right? There's fun gambling where people can engage in some level of activities and can control themselves and may only involve or get themselves involved in the office lottery pool once a year. But let's just face it, what we have seen, as specifically in the state of Ohio since January 1st of 2023, when online sports betting went in, at Mary Haven alone, the call volume quadrupled within the first few weeks from individuals that are saying, listen, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm finding myself spending more and more of my time online on these applications and spending more of my money, I think I need help, but they don't always recognize the signs. I mean, let's just face it, in the first 3 quarters, the Bureau of Economic Analysis suggested that Americans spent over $400 billion in the gambling industry alone. And we have seen the fallout with some of those who do not realize how compulsive gambling addiction can be. And our team has been on the front lines for quite some time.
Quadrupled.
Quadruple.
Wow. So with that in mind, Abdullah, is there a typical story that you see in someone who is coming to you for help, or is it a broad spectrum of folks?
And this is more anecdotal, but what we have seen here at Maryhaven and with my clientele is that people started betting and gambling on sports even before it was legalized in the state of Ohio, with people going to offshore websites, betting and gambling as soon as they turned 15 to 16 with their friends and peers. And then as well as when it became legalized, they had more opportunity to do so, and it becomes a problem for those individuals as well.
How about demographics? Is it, younger people, older people, different socioeconomic backgrounds?
Yeah, with my clientele and what we see across the state and across the nation is usually, young Caucasian males between the ages of 18 and 44. And more particularly, in those demographics, we see an uprise in those ages of between 18 and 26 as well.
Is gambling addiction similar to or different than other forms of addiction, say for substance use?
Substance use and gambling can be very similar in terms of affecting the brain, the prefrontal cortex, it being having that dopaminergic response in the brain as well. But it is so financially driven. Finances are the critical component to this disease and addiction, to where people become financially devastated. They take out a second mortgage, refinance their car, to where it becomes financially devastating. And people chase their losses. They have that compulsive need to break even. So it's unique in that sense.
Yeah, and Oyama, this probably isn't just financial though, because that can leak over into other aspects of a family's life.
Yeah, typically what we see is co-occurring conditions that often result with respect to gambling addiction. So they may also find themselves abusing alcohol, abusing drugs. We've also come to learn that statistically speaking, 1 out of 2 problem gamblers also find themselves being domestic violence abusers. And so we often will see that level of family dynamic that plays out, and the ability to also lean in from a counseling perspective to ensure that we can provide the right level of treatment. We see type A personalities. We see people of all walks of life. We've also seen a spike in the number of African American males and Hispanic males who have also been affected by online gambling and addiction.
How does your facility help families? Maybe they aren't all the gambler, but how do you help families?
One of the greatest things that we do is we've been the #1 provider in the state of Ohio for gambling addiction treatment. So our clinicians and our therapists are trained. And what they do is they sit down with not only the individual, but the family that is ultimately impacted, because it's everyone. Everyone is involved in this process. And it's really trying to make certain that they can understand the signs and the symptoms that are associated with that loved one that may have that level of an addiction, and how they can also help. And then also helping those family members get the help that they need, because here's what ends up happening. When that compulsive disorder has hit, oftentimes by the time it has peaked, in most cases, the financial position for that family has been ruined. They may have lost their home, they may have lost a job, they may have lost all kinds of components of that family structure. And so our therapists and clinicians at Maryhaven are trained to help them get the resources that they need to get back on their feet and to be able to start functioning as a loving family environment again.
Abdullah, we're heading up to the Super Bowl now. As a counselor, as a therapist, what do you recommend for people so they don't fall into the pitfalls of addiction?
Know your limits, set your limits, and not in just terms of how much you're going to wager, but time spent gambling as well. The National Council on Problem Gambling has partnered up with the NFL to air those commercials as well during the Super Bowl and throughout the season. So you should be able to see, responsible gambling tips on your television this season around, including the Super Bowl, of how to bet responsibly. And people know, but some people don't know. And of course, when that compulsion takes over, when there's more time spent gambling and wagering and betting, then it becomes a problem for those individuals.
And so, Oyama, then, if somebody here watching knows that they or someone they know needs help, someone they love, what can they do about reaching out for help?
You know, there are a number of resources that are available out there. First and foremost, we always ask you to go out and visit with us at maryhaven.com. There's also a national program, as well as I'll ask Abdullah to talk about, there's another statewide program where they can reach out. There are phone numbers that are available, certainly a lot of online resources that can assist them. The thing that I want to make sure that we also understand is with addiction relative to gambling, it actually has the highest suicide rate. 1 out of 5 problem gamblers end up attempting and or committing suicide. So it is relatively and critically important that if someone believes that they are exemplifying the signs and the symptoms, or if you are a loved one, a coworker, because oftentimes in that work environment, what we see is they're the ones that are often tied to embezzlement. They're the ones that are often tied to things that are financially impacting that company in the negative way. So if you're seeing signs and symptoms for someone that you love and care about, make certain that you reach out. Visit us at maryhaven.com. We are not only the #1 provider in the state of Ohio, but we've been nationally recognized. So our teams are there to help you navigate you through these moments so that we can turn this around.
Well, thank you both. We are out of time right now, but I think we covered a lot of good ground, good information out there. So thank you both.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you were talking about those numbers too. If you or someone you know is struggling with gambling, you can call the National Problem Gambling Helpline at 1-800-GAMBLER. It also offers text and chat services. It's not a crisis line, but they do offer support, information, and referrals to services for help, such as Mary Haven. If you or a loved one is in crisis, then call 911 or 988. Thank you for joining me this week. There will be no Face the State next Sunday morning due to coverage leading up to Super Bowl 58. So I'll see you for the next Face the State in a couple weeks. I'm Doug Petcash. Have a great day.